Mormonism with the Murph, where we do a fair and objective analysis of the church and its truth claims, its history, doctrine, and policy. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Mormonism with the Murph, where Laddie explores the church's history and the church's truth claims. So we're continuing our series on the Book of Mormon. In the last episode, we had a look at the King James Bible and why do King James Bible passages show up in the Book of Mormon. We looked at some of the errors from the King James Bible. What are they doing in the Book of Mormon? Italics and mistranslated passages from the Bible that Joe Smith corrected in the JST, but that make their way into the Book of Mormon. And we had a look at some of the critical arguments and conclusions and some of faithful apologetics. So go back and watch that one. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the Mound Builder myth and Ethan Smith's view of the Hebrews, and if Joseph Smith plagiarized or was influenced by that book and the sort of surrounding ideas about the Mound Builder myth. And we're going to get into that. And in the series, I'm striving to be fair, objective. I want to try to look at the evidence and the information on both sides and let people come to their own conclusions. So let me get the presentation ready and we're going to go through it. So the Mound Builder myth, we're going to be talking about what is the Mound Builder myth. So the most important influence to the Book of Mormon is also largely shaped by the biblical beliefs of Joe Smith's times, and that is the Mound Builder's myth. The Mound Builder's myth originated when European settlers came to the Americas and saw all sorts of mounds that had been built up. When the settlers arrived, they believed the Native Americans to be a wild, savage race and therefore could not possibly imagine that they could have built these mounds and civilizations, and instead attributed the mounds to a lost superior race of white people just like themselves, which is quite a racist view and theory they had. In the mounds were the buried remains of Native Americans, but since it was just bones inside, the white European settlers created a myth that these are the remains of these lost civilizations and that they had been exterminated by the dark, savage Indians. If this sounds familiar, it's because the Mound Builder's myth largely mirrors the Book of Mormon's narrative. So critics would view that Joseph Smith's idea for the Lamanites and the Nephites, the Lamanites were cursed with dark skin and they ended up wiping out the Nephites at the end of the Book of Mormon, and that this comes from the Mound Builder myth because European settlers believed that these, savage Native American Indians, as they would have viewed them, were not sophisticated or able to construct these civilized sort of structures and mounds. So there had to be a superior white race. A little bit more on the Mound Builder myth. So some of the belief in the Mound Builders, let me just close this 1 second. Some of the belief in the Mound Builders myth was that there must have been an ancient white race that lived in the Americas that was destroyed by the Indians, which was a way for settlers to claim that the lands were rightfully theirs. So it was a way to justify them sort of like taking the land of and exterminating a lot of the Indians. Furthermore, once the Native Americans began losing their lands and people to war, disease, and famine, this myth allowed the settlers to justify that the Native Americans could not possibly have been this evolved and advanced as a civilization, which further proved the Mound Builder myth in their worldview. This allowed the myth to grow, and these settlers then told stories of this ancient race that attempted to fight off these savage intruders, using these fortified mounds until they were exterminated by them. And there's a lot more books you could read about the Mound Builder myth. I know Dan Vogel has a book about, Indian origins, and, he's got an episode, I'll maybe link it at the end, on Mormon Stories, where he talks more in depth about the Mound Builder myth. I'll put some links in as well if people want to dive deeper. But this is one quote from this author from LDS Discussions. Prior to the Revolutionary War, the fact that the mounds had been built by American Indians was so well established that it required neither explanation nor defense. By the time Andrew Jackson became president in 1829, the idea had become an inconvenient truth. In his efforts to remove American Indian tribes from their lands in the eastern United States, Jackson claimed that the mounds had been built by an unknown people who were exterminated by the existing savage tribes. Therefore, the United States government was perfectly justified in removing those tribes from the lands they had stolen from the supposedly more civilized lost race of mound builders. And he was running for president. He became the president in 1829, and this was sort of the cultural view and understanding had sort of across the nation that there was a civilized white race that must have built these structures and were exterminated or wiped out by the savage American Indians. LDS Discussions goes on to say this is why the Book of Mormon's text was accepted by so many people in the 19th century. It was the belief that the Native Americans did originate from an ancient white race that was overtaken by the Red Indians. The problem, of course, is that this was simply a myth created by these settlers to explain the Native Americans and to provide a justification for removing the Native Americans from their lands and to slaughter and decimate their populations. I'm spending a lot of time on the Mound Builder myth because it informs us of how people thought in Joseph Smith's time. This will be important as we look at the view of the Hebrews. The Mound Builder myth was white European settlers imposing their beliefs on the identity of Native Americans as a way to dehumanize them, just as the Book of Mormon has taken the identity of Native Americans and Polynesians away with a book that is simply not historical or true. So they're saying that they are attributing, the history of the American Indians, that they are, savage, that they wiped out this white race. And also in books like View of the Hebrews, they believe that they had Hebrew origin. They descended from Israel. We know with DNA studies and analysis that over 99.6% of Native Americans that have been DNA tested come from Asia. And apologists, they would say this would be very damning to a hemispheric model if you believe that the Lamanites and the Nephites populated the entire continent and that Native Americans descended from them, then that would be very, very problematic. But they hold to a what's the name of the small geography model? I've spaced on the name, but it's sort of like a Mesoamerican, very small model for the geography and the location of the Book of Mormon. So let's go to the next slide. And there's a picture on the screen of some of these mounds, and there's like tens of thousands of them all scattered across the United States. So this comes from Fair Latter-day Saints. So did Joseph Smith believe that the Book of Mormon explained local legends as associated with the mound builders of the eastern United States? So this is what Fair has to say. Joseph Smith himself initially believed that the presence of the mound supported the story related in the Book of Mormon. In fact, as Zion's camp passed through southern Illinois, Heber C. Kimball and several other participants claimed that Joseph identified a set of bones discovered in one of these mounds as Zelph, a white Lamanite. In a letter that Joseph wrote to Emma the day after this discovery, he stated, "The whole of our journey in the midst of so large a company of social, honest, and sincere men, wandering over the plains of the Nephites, recounting occasionally the history of the Book of Mormon, roving over the mounds of that once beloved people of the Lord, picking up their skulls and their bones as a proof of its divine authenticity, and gazing upon a country, the fertility, the splendor, and the goodness so indescribable, all serves to pass away time unnoticed." And Heartland sort of believers who believe that the Book of Mormon took place in, North America would point to this quote that Joe Smith believed, that I think certainly in a hemispheric view of the Book of Mormon's geography and historicity, that it took place both in North America as well as Central and South America. But they would definitely use this to support their theory. But they go on to say that Joseph felt that the presence of the mounds in North America and ruined cities in Central America supported the Book of Mormon. Since information about the ruined cities in Central America came to light after the Book of Mormon, it actually strengthens the theories and evidence which placed the Book of Mormon in a Mesoamerican setting. Joseph was willing to consider a setting of which he apparently had no previous knowledge. The description of the ancestors of the American Indians as a highly civilized culture capable of building great cities was not a concept which would have been deduced from the contemporary beliefs regarding the mound builders. The presence of numerous burial mounds in the eastern United States was the source of great speculation to those that settled there. The construction of such mounds was not considered to be within the ability of the Native Americans, who were considered to be savages. It was assumed that such sophisticated constructions constituted evidence of a long-lost, highly civilized society which had long since vanished. Some even postulated the existence of separate civilized and savage societies, with the highly civilized group eventually being destroyed by the savage one. After years of research, however, it was concluded that the mounds had indeed been constructed by the ancestors of the Indians that continued to live in the area. Joseph clearly believed not only the only the region of the mounds to be part of Book of Mormon lands, but the entire continent, including Central America. The Book of Mormon itself, however, makes no mention of mounds. So they're also acknowledging that this was the view held by many people in Joseph Smith's day of the Mound Builder myth, and that Joseph Smith would have been influenced and susceptible to that view as well, whether or not that influenced then the story of the Book of Mormon. And I think it's very clear that Joseph Smith believed that the Book of Mormon took place in both North, Central, and South America, the hemispheric model, which scholars and apologists would no longer hold to, but a very small geography. So let's go to the next slide. So if someone in that area were to attempt to write a book about history of the North American Indians, this comes from Fair, they would not have written about advanced civilizations with advanced technology. So they're going to make the argument that the Book of Mormon also makes claims about them being a very advanced people, advanced sort of technology and all the warfare and all the buildings and things they were doing, which maybe doesn't align with the view of the mound builders and ancient Israelites or ancient Native Americans. One thing that critics do not consider is that if someone of that era were to attempt to write a book about a history of the North American Indians, he or she would not have written about advanced civilizations with advanced technology. Although part of the mound builder myth is they did think that the race that built these sophisticated mounds and things must have been more advanced. The mysterious mound builders were not considered to be the ancestors of the current savage race that were inhabiting the land at the time. Some of the witnesses of the Book of Mormon realized that there were going to be problems with this assumption after the publication of the Book of Mormon. David Whitmer said, "When we were first told to publish our statement, we felt sure that people would not believe it, for the book told of a people who were refined and dwelt in large cities, but the Lord told us that he would make it known to the people, and people should discover evidence of the truth of what is written in the book." So I think they're trying to say that, oh, well, the Book of Mormon's narrative about advanced civilizations with advanced technology doesn't line up with their view of, the American Indians, but they did believe with the Mound Builder myth in a superior, civilized and advanced race, white race that lived with them. And interesting in that quote, how the Lord says that he'll make it known, discovering evidence, the truth of what is written in this book. And if that is a, authentic quote, then we should be looking for the Lord providing evidence then to support the Book of Mormon's historicity, perhaps not proof, but according to that quote, that there's going to be evidence that from when they had their vision of the gold plates, that there should be evidence coming forth. And certainly I think they interpreted all the, Mayan ruins and buildings and temples as support for the Book of Mormon's historicity. So let's go to talk a little bit about View of the Hebrews. So we've kind of covered the Mound Builder myth. So Ethan Smith was a minister in Pulteney, Vermont, who published View of the Hebrews, which expounds upon a commonly held notion of the time of the numerous and distinct Indian tribes having originated from Hebrew stock. View of the Hebrews enjoyed wide circulation in New England and New York, running through 2 editions in 1823 and 1825. So a few years before the Book of Mormon came forth and in the same sort of area. Like many other theologians of various denominations, Ethan Smith suggested that it was America's mission to gather the remnants of the house of Israel, reiterating the legend that the stick of Joseph and Ephraim would one day be united, which is a similar motif or theme in the Book of Mormon. His book describes copper breastplates taken from the mounds with 2 white buckhorn buttons fastened to the outside of each plate, in resemblance to a Urim and Thummim. His book describes a prophet atop a wall in Jerusalem, exhorting while the wicked unsuccessfully assail him with arrows. Few more, I think that's the connections or similarities to Samuel the Lamanite in the Book of Mormon. Few Mormons today have heard of Ethan's work or how perfectly it fits into the 19th century worldview that informed Joseph Smith. Oliver Cowdery, Joseph Smith's third cousin and primary scribe on the Book of Mormon, was undoubtedly aware of View of the Hebrews as he lived in Pulteney for 26 years and his family attended Ethan's congregation. And some critics speculate that that Joseph Smith used the view of the Hebrews. That's the source for the Book of Mormon. And we'll have a look at some of the parallels between the two books, and then what apologists might say about, a lack of parallels. And some people speculate that, if Ethan Smith was the sort of pastor or minister of Oliver Cowdery's family, Oliver Cowdery could have taken those ideas to Joseph Smith, and that's where he came up with the Book of Mormon. So we'll explore some of the parallels and similarities between the books. This comes from LDS Discussions. So 1927, LDS historian and general authority B.H. Roberts undertook a project to answer problems for the Book of Mormon's claims to being an ancient historical document. Throughout his studies, he noted many of the similarities between the view of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon. Among some of the quotes from Roberts regarding the view of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon, for years such materials as were then found and discussed, theories as to the origin of the American Indians, including the 10 lost tribes theory of Hebrew infusion into the American race, together with frequent mention of cultural traits favorable to the supposed Hebrew infusion. All this was a matter of common speculation in the literature of America before the publication of either Priest's American Antiquities of the Book of Mormon. It is often represented by Mormon speakers and writers that the Book of Mormon was first to represent the American Indians as descendants of the Hebrews. Although the Book of Mormon is unique in this, the claim is sometimes still ignorantly made. So the Book of Mormon wasn't the first or unique in claiming that the Native Americans descend from Israel, and there are other books during Joseph Smith's time that believed in the same thing. It is altogether probable that these two books, Priest's Wonder of Nature and Providence, Ethan Smith's view of the Hebrews, and the second edition were either possessed by Joseph Smith or certainly known by him, for they were surely available to him. So whether or not Joseph Smith, read the books, again, with the Mound Builder myth, I'm sure it would have been in the environment, and there's a good possibility that he was aware of it. Did Ethan Smith view the Hebrews furnish structural material for Joseph Smith's Book of Mormon? It has been pointed out in these pages that there are many things in the former book that might have well suggested many major things in the other. Not a few things merely, one or two or half a dozen, but many, and it is this fact of many things of similarity and the cumulative force of them that makes them so serious a menace to Joseph Smith's story of the Book of Mormon origin. So that comes from B.H. Roberts' studies on the Book of Mormon. And we're going to have a look at the parallels between the two books. And refined critics wouldn't say, because the books are very different. One is, a long story narrative. One is sort of more like a essay sort of style, but that there's similar motifs or parallels in the two books. I'm not going to read all of these, but I have these bullet points that you can read through, but I'll read through a few of them. It talks about the rejection of Jesus Christ as our atoning savior, as a similarity between the two books. O Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets, and the destruction of Jerusalem. That after they settled in America, they became wholly separated from the hunting and savage tribes of their brethren. They lost the knowledge of their having descended from the same family, which happens to Lehi's family, or Nephi and Laman and Lemuel, separate from each other, and that they become sort of uncivilized and savage, and they're cursed with dark skin. The more civilized part continued for many centuries. Tremendous wars were frequent between them and their savage brethren, till the former became extinct, similar to what we read in the Book of Mormon. Lots of wars between the Nephites and the Lamanites until the Nephites get wiped out at the end of the Book of Mormon. An old Indian informed him that his fathers in this country had a book which they had for a long time preserved, but having lost the knowledge of reading it, they concluded it would be of no further use to them, and they buried it with an Indian chief, kind of similar to Moroni, sort of being the last prophet riding on the gold plates and burying the gold plates into the earth. Some modern Jew left it there in the situation which it was found on an Indian hill underground, similar to the hill Cumorah, where the plates were buried. The accounts of the old Indian that his fathers had buried not long ago, a book which they could read. The prophet Isaiah to be of deep interest in America, so long passages of Isaiah were quoted in both books. The great generous Christian people who occupy much of the land of those natives and who are on the ground of their continent, and hence are the best prepared to ameliorate their condition and bring them to the knowledge and order of the God of Israel, must of course be the people to whom this work is assigned. they will be fulfilled only in the conversion of the ancient people to God and Christianity. And it talks about in the Book of Mormon trying to restore both the Jews, the house of Israel, as well as Gentiles, through converting them to the God of Israel, Jesus Christ. The author here says the purpose of introducing Ethan's thesis is not to suggest that Joseph plagiarized the work, but rather to reaffirm how prevalent such notions of Native Americans were in Joseph Smith's day, and how others were also mirroring scriptural language to express a now discredited narrative. So let's talk about Farr's response to sort of the view of the Hebrews, the claim of either plagiarism or parallels between the two books. So Farr says it is claimed the 19th century work by Ethan Smith, View of the Hebrews, provides source material for Joseph Smith's construction of the Book of Mormon. I would say source material or sort of a general outline. Some also postulate a link between Ethan Smith and Oliver Cowdery, since both men lived in Pulteney, Vermont, while Smith served as the pastor. This is Ethan Smith, that Oliver Cowdery's family attended at the time that View of the Hebrews was being written. So the View of the Hebrews theory is yet another attempt to fit a secular origin to the Book of Mormon. Many of the criticisms proposed are based upon B.H. Roberts' list of parallels, which only have validity if one applied a hemispheric geography model to the Book of Mormon. There are a significant number of differences between the two books, which are easily discovered upon reading Ethan Smith's work. Many points that Ethan Smith thought were important are not mentioned at all in the Book of Mormon, and many of the parallels are no longer valid based upon current scholarship. So they would say current scholarship would point to that the hemispheric model is not doesn't align with the text, and it's the limited geography model of a smaller area of land that the supposed Nephites and Lamanites would have had to have lived upon. And sort of the John Sorensen model is where most scholars believe the location of the Book of Mormon was. The theory that Joseph Smith plagiarized the View of the Hebrews was never advanced during Joseph Smith's lifetime. There was, however, a reference to View of the Hebrews within Joseph Smith's lifetime, but it came from the prophet himself, in an article published in the Times and Seasons on June 1st, 1842. Joseph quoted View of the Hebrews in support of the Book of Mormon, and they're probably thinking, why would he use this book to support the Book of Mormon if he plagiarized from it? You wouldn't want to try to give away the source you're plagiarizing from. And Joseph probably believed that this book further supported the Book of Mormon and that the Native Americans descend from Israel. Roberts concluded that if one assumed that Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon himself, that View of the Hebrews could have provided him with a foundation for creating the book. In fact, many of the issues highlighted by Roberts vanish when a limited geography theory is considered. The acceptance of the View of the Hebrews theory is therefore contingent upon the acceptance of a hemispheric geography model for the Book of Mormon. In order to promote View of the Hebrews as a source, critics necessarily reject any limited geography theory proposal for the Book of Mormon. Now, I would say that was probably the face value reading of the Book of Mormon. I think that would have been Joseph Smith and all the early church leaders and saints' interpretation or understanding of the Book of Mormon, that they inhabited the entire continent of North and South America. As scholars have scrutinized the text and the distances traveled, they realize that this is not covering the whole continent, if you believe that this is an ancient record. So parallels between the two books. So Farrell Saints have to say some parallels do exist between the two books. For example, View of the Hebrews postulates the existence of a civilized and barbarous nation who were constantly at war with one with another, with a civilized society eventually being destroyed by their uncivilized brethren. This has obvious similarities to the story of the Nephites and the Lamanites in the Book of Mormon. So they're acknowledging the parallels in the sort of big overarching part of the story of the savage, uncivilized civilization overthrowing and destroying the civilized one. This highlights the fact that general parallels are likely to be found between works that treat the same types of subjects, such as ancient history. In what ancient conflict did one side not see themselves as representing light and civilization against the dark barbarous of their enemies? Critics generally ignore the presence of many unparallels. These are elements of Ethan Smith's book, which would have provided a rich source of material for Joseph to use in order to persuade his contemporaries that the Book of Mormon was an ancient history of the American Indians and that they were descended from Israel. Yet the Book of Mormon consistently ignores such supposed bullseyes, which is good news for proponents of the Book of Mormon's authenticity, since virtually all of Ethan's evidences have been judged to be false or misleading. So this comes from, I believe this comes from an article on Dialogue. This is from Blake Ostler, and he has to say that View of the Hebrews has been widely suggested as Joseph Smith's source for the Book of Mormon. The claims of noteworthy parallels between the two works, aside from proximity of publication, include providing an Israelite origin for the American Indian, a holy book the Indians wrote, which they will have again, two groups, one savage, lazy, and ignorant, and one civilized and expert in mechanical arts in ancient America, the savage destroying the civilized. Both feature the fall of Jerusalem. They quote Isaiah extensively on the restoration of Israel and the rise of a great Gentile nation, allegedly quoting Ezekiel 37 to identify the stick of Judah with the Bible and the stick of Joseph as a new record, and allegedly speak of the Urim and Thummim. And you can see those similarities and parallels to the Book of Mormon. View of the Hebrews speaks of Quetzalcoatl, I know I'm saying the name wrong, and the Book of Mormon of the resurrected Christ in ancient America. And Brent Gardner talks about in our interview that the view of Quetzalcoatl, the white god, and that being sort of a parallel to Jesus Christ visiting the ancient sort of Native Americans, that is really a stretch, and there's not good parallels to that. On closer examination, these seeming parallels are much less compelling. Views teaches that the American Indians descend from a single migration of the 10 tribes following the fall of Jerusalem in 721 BC to the Assyrians. The Book of Mormon speaks of at least 3 migrations, one at the time of the Tower of Babel, and 2 at the fall of Israel to Babylon in 588 BC. The Book of Mormon is not a story of the 10 tribes and does not claim, like the Indian Book and Views, to have been written in Hebrew on parchment, but in Reformed Egyptian on gold plates. View of the Hebrews quotes numerous biblical passages on the restoration of Israel, which are essential to Ethan Smith's argument, including, I'm not going to read all the passages. View of the Hebrews sees Quetzalcoatl as a figure of Moses rather than as Jesus, a significant distinction. So you could say that there are parallels and similarities between the two books, but there's also differences as you look at them closer. And even just the writing of the book, they're very different books. So you couldn't say that Joe Smith just plagiarized and took everything from View of the Hebrews, but you could argue that perhaps there was an influence, and they're both coming from the milieu, the environment, the Mound Builder myth, and that's what influenced the Book of Mormon. So critics' conclusion on the Mound Builder myth and the View of the Hebrews. It's not that Joseph Smith plagiarized View of the Hebrews for the Book of Mormon. I do not believe there is any reason to believe Joseph Smith plagiarized any other book beyond copying large sections of the King James Bible. But what is clear is that the Mound Builder myth was very strong in Joseph Smith's time and place, and this led to many authors writing books to try and fill in the history of the Native Americans to fit their own beliefs and conclusions. In other words, I believe the similarities between View of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon are due to both Ethan Smith and Joseph Smith working from the Mound Builders myth, and that they were both trying to work through the idea of an ancient superior race that was wiped out by the dark-skinned Native Americans. It is quite possible that Joseph Smith read View of the Hebrews and took some general ideas from it, but those ideas were already present in his milieu. View of the Hebrews doesn't show plagiarism, but that these ideas were so prevalent in Joseph Smith's time that you would expect these kind of stories to be written. As I've tried to show through these sections, the Book of Mormon literally could not have been written in any time but Joseph Smith's lifetime. So sophisticated critics would say, they wouldn't argue that he had viewed the Hebrews out and he was plagiarizing parts, and that explains the Book of Mormon. He may have read it, he may not have read it, but that this comes from the milieu. Both View of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon come from this Mound Builder myth that was had in his 19th century environment. And that's where sort of the influence comes into the Book of Mormon. Sort of a faithful view on it, the significant differences between View of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon tend to rule it out as a direct dependence. View of the Hebrews has nothing in common with the Book of Mormon in style of presentation. View View of the Hebrews presents itself as a list of proofs, while the Book of Mormon is a religious history. None of the 34 Indian words mentioned in Views as proof of Hebrew Indian origins appear in the Book of Mormon. Ethan Smith's Indians, as another proof of their Hebrew origins, carry the Ark of the Covenant to war. The Book of Mormon, despite recurrent wars, does not mention the Ark. Ethan lists numerous Indian practices which suggest Hebrew festivals, sacrifices, and temple rituals. The Book of Mormon makes no direct allusions to any practices recognized in View of the Hebrews. Ethan Smith claims that the Indians always migrated from north to south. The Book of Mormon migrations in the New World, however, are all from south to north. Furthermore, Book of Mormon people do not practice the law of Moses after the coming of Christ, and Book of Mormon remnants therefore would be expected to exhibit Christian practices and not the Hebrew practices of View of the Hebrews. Hence, the Book of Mormon contradicts View of the Hebrews on several crucial points, and the case for direct dependence fails because the Book of Mormon either significantly modifies the supposed parallel or does not mention it at all. In short, similarities between View of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon do not require the dependence on one upon the other, but are more easily explained as two reflections of common 19th century assumptions about the American Indians. Conclusion slide. There was in Joseph's culture a view of a superior white race who lived and who were destroyed by the savage Native Americans or Indians. This is known as the Mound Builder myth, a civilized race who were superior, more advanced in technology. Critics would view the story of the Nephites and Lamanites as coming from this myth. Critics point to plagiarisms or parallels, and I would also say B.H. Roberts as well, who was the general authority and historian. Plagiarism or parallels between the Book of Mormon and the View of the Hebrews as a source either for the outline of the Book of Mormon or just plagiarizing ideas. Apologists point to the unparallels and the differences between the two texts, showing that Joseph Smith wasn't dependent on it and it was not a source for the Book of Mormon. Some more refined scholars don't believe that there was plagiarism from View of the Hebrews, but perhaps an influence, or that both books may have been influenced by Joseph Smith's milieu and environment. The Mound Builder myth, which may have influenced the story for the Nephites and the Lamanites. If you have a naturalist perspective as a believer, you could just say that there are some similarities between the view that they had, people in Joseph Smith's time and his day, and that lines up with the historical narrative in the Book of Mormon. And that sums up today's episode. In the next episode, we will be looking at did Joseph Smith plagiarize from other books? So we'll be looking at the Late War and the First Book of Napoleon. And, was he plagiarizing things from these books as he wrote the Book of Mormon? So we're going to be doing that next time. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you on the next episode on Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks everyone for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, like, share, comment, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can listen to my episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If you care to donate, you can via my PayPal or Patreon. Thanks for joining Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.